Ole and Sven were walking to work one summer day. It was a beautiful day. They walked by Silver Lake, and there was just a little ripple on it. And Ole said to Sven, he says, you know, Sven, what a beautiful day to be out in our boat with a fishing pole in our hand. But you know, he said, the boss won't let us off. We've got too much work to do there. So they got to work, and they were the first ones there. And they met in this little building. Didn't have a ceiling, but just the rafters. So Ole went and he got a ladder, and he climbed up into the rafter. And he put one leg over one 2x4 and his other leg over the other 2x4. And then he dropped down, so he was looking down at the ground. And so when the boss came in, he said, Ole, what in the world are you doing up there in the rafters? Ole said, I'm a light. I'm a light bulb, and I'm showing light all around. Well, Ole, you come down from there, and guess what? I'm going to give you the day off. You've been under a lot of stress, and you've been working long hours. So, Ole, you can go home, and you rest and relax and get all ready for the next day. So Ole jumps down, and he goes over and picks up his lunch pail and heads for the door. And with that, Sven goes over and picks up his lunch pail and follows Ole to the door. And the boss says, hey, Sven, where are you going? I only told Ole he could get off. Well, Sven said, I might as well go too, because I can't work without a light. Ole was downtown and at rush hour, and he decided to take the city bus home. And I believe the driver was Pastor Kenny. He was doing a little moonlighting. And so when Ole got on the bus, there was only one seat left, and that was an aisle seat. So he sat there. And Kenny drove the bus, and they went up and they stopped and took on people and took off people. Finally, it was Ole's had the next stop, so he went over and he pulled the cord so Kenny would know just where that he needed to stop at the next corner. So when Kenny stopped and opened the door, Ole got up, but Ole backed down that crowded aisle because people were standing from front to back. And he backs down to the aisle and down to the door, and he backs out of the bus onto the sidewalk. And who should be walking by but his friend Lars? And so they started talking a little bit, and then Lars says, by the way, Ole, I saw you come out of that bus, and you backed out of the bus. All the other people, they walked forward. Why did you back out? Well, Ole says, you've seen how crowded that bus was. Well, I overheard the guy standing by me tell the guy standing next to him that when I got up, he was going to grab my seat. Ole and Sven were traveling on the bus from Seattle to Minneapolis. And before they went to the train station, they stopped at the grocery store and they each bought a few bananas in case they got hungry on the way. So they boarded the train, and after about 3-4 hours, Ole was feeling kind of hungry. So he opened his backpack and he pulled out a banana and he peeled it. And just as he took his first bite, the train went into this long, dark tunnel. And it was pitch black. And Ole said to Sven, Sven, have you eaten your banana yet? Sven says, no, not yet. Well, don't, Ole says, because I took a bite and I've been totally blind. Sven has a son, Sven Jr., and he came home from school the other day, and he says, Pa, he says, I found out that I have the biggest feet in the 4th grade. Pa, do you think that's because I'm Norwegian? Sven Sr. says, no, it's because you're 19. Ole and Lena were sitting at the breakfast table, and Ole was reading the paper, and Lena was looking out the kitchen window. And she says to Ole, you know, I'm watching that new young couple that just moved in next door. And I just saw she walked out with him as he was going to work. And before he opened the car door, he went over and gave her a huge, big hug and kissed her right on her lips. Ole, why don't you ever do that? And Ole says, well, because I don't even know her yet. Ole and Sven were watching the Minnesota Twins, and Ole says, you know, I just love baseball. That's my favorite sport. And then he said to Sven, Sven, do you think there's baseball in heaven? Well, Sven says, I'm not quite sure, but I know what it says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the big inning. So maybe there is. Well, Ole said, let's make a deal. The first one of us who dies and goes to heaven should try to make contact with the one who's still on earth to tell him if there's baseball in heaven or not. Well, Sven went to heaven first. And one day, Ole, a few weeks after, was walking early in the morning, as he always did. And as he was walking, he thought he heard a voice. Ole, Ole. But he looked around and there wasn't a person around. He couldn't see anyone near. So he kept walking, and again he heard that voice. Ole, Ole. And he looked around, still there was nobody around. He thought he was going a little goofy, but he kept walking, and he heard again, Ole, Ole, this is Sven. Oh, Sven, good to hear your voice. What's up? Well, Sven says, I have good news and bad news for you. Well, give me the good news first. The good news is there is baseball in heaven. How can there be any bad news then? Well, you're scheduled to pitch on Monday. The other morning, Ole was going to go to work. And before he went out, Lena said, Ole, when you get home, would you take a look at my washing machine? It's not running quite right. And Ole grunts and he says, do I look like the Maytag repairman? And then she said, and Ole too, after you look at the wash machine, would you look at my car? There's some kind of a noise in my engine. And Ole grunts again. He says, do I look like Mr. Goodwrench? And so he went to work. And when Ole came home that night, Lena was so excited. She said, Ole, you'll never guess what happened today. What happened? Well, that new, young, good-looking fellow that moved in next door, he came over today and introduced himself. And guess what, Ole? He fixed my washing machine and the engine in the car. Well, Ole says, how much did he charge for all that? And she says, well, when I asked him how much I owed him, he said I could either bake him a cake or go out with him some night for a candlelight supper at a fancy restaurant. Well, Ole says, what kind of a cake did you bake him? And Lena says, well, do I look like Betty Crocker? And then Ole and Lena invited their good friends, Einar and Lena Genster. Einar and Lena Genster were very good friends, and they invited him over for a lutefisk supper. And I tell you, Ole's Lena went all out. She not only baked the lutefisk and made cream gravy, they had boiled potatoes. She made rice pudding and potato sausage, and they had lingonberries and herring. And then she also had fruit soup. Well, they sat down at the table, and Ole gave grace, and Lena got up and went to the stove and opened the oven door and took out the lutefisk that she was keeping warm. And so they passed the food around, and when the lutefisk came to Einar, he took several pieces, and then he put that cream gravy over it. But he said, I hate to ask you this, Lena, but do you have any pepper? I like to put pepper on my lutefisk. Well, I got pepper, Einar. So she went over to the cupboard and grabbed a shaker, and he put on a big dose of it. And they ate and they fellowshipped, and they had such a good time over that dinner. And Einar looked at his watch, and he told his Lena, we better go home. It's getting late, and we have a busy day tomorrow. So they went home, and Lena started to clean up the table, putting things away, and she grabbed that shaker and looked at it. And she said, Ole, come here. I made a terrible mistake. Remember when Einar asked for the pepper? Well, I grabbed the shaker, and it was buckshot in it instead of pepper. Well, I need to apologize, but it's just too late right now. So I'll call him right away in the morning. So they got up in the morning, and Lena called over, and Einar answered the phone, and she said, Einar, I have a great apology to give to you. Remember last night when you asked for the pepper and I gave you that shaker? Well, that wasn't pepper, that was buckshot. Oh, Lena, thank you so much for calling, because that really solves a mystery. What kind of a mystery is that? Well, Lena, when we got home, I went and hung up my jacket, and I walked into the bedroom, and when I stooped over to untie my shoelaces, I shot and killed the cat.